Epic Conversations, 2020 Best Podcast News Award winner, 2018 Innovation Award winner given out by the Canadian Ethnic Media Association. And I host the only online conversation in the world for fathers and dads. It's sponsored by Dove Men Care, also co-sponsored by Dad Central, Canada's national fatherhood organization. And being part of that collaboration last year, was able to reach out directly and indirectly to over 100,000 fathers around the world. We are broadcasting live January 16th today. Black Canada Talking. We do this every Sunday afternoon at 5 p.m. And Black Canada Talking is a live online event that provides Black Canadians the opportunity to give their takes and POVs to stories that are important to them, and also bi-weekly, like we're doing today. From the East, what is going on, L. Jones?
Me, I think we were frozen. It's freezing a bit for me, so I don't know if that's on my end or on your end. I'm not sure. Dr. Vibe, you're frozen for me, but maybe I'm the one that's frozen for everybody else. It's like Schrodinger's frozen. Okay. I'll just wait. I guess I'll talk since you guys can hear me. Actually, maybe that's better. So Dr. Vibe is frozen. I'm Elle Jones. I'm here in Halifax on the East Coast. So hi, everybody. Later on in the show, we're going to talk a little bit about something I've been doing, which is a report that we have done, the biggest public consultation on defunding the police, I think, that's been done on any municipality. And we finally have our report. Police board is tomorrow, so I'm all stressed out, but that's what's been going on in me. And hi, Sarah. I guess I'm Dr. Vibe. We'll introduce each other. How are you?
Hi, Elle. I should say habari because I've just come back from Kenya. It's not even been a week. And I wish I had brought all that sun with me. It was 30 degrees plus over there, and I came back to this Arctic weather here, so I'm having a hard time adjusting to that. I'm going to highlight Martin Luther King Jr. Day, since yesterday was his actual birthday, and Monday is the federal holiday in the United States. I'm also going to highlight Lincoln Alexander Day, which I really wish Canadians would highlight more than they do MLK Day, because Lincoln Alexander is the only Canadian of African descent who has a national day named for him. So that's what I'd like to highlight.
I actually did that until you sent the email about Lincoln Alexander Day. I didn't even know it existed. And go ahead. Sorry.
Hi, everyone. César Demamoussa here, President of Roots and Culture Canada. And basically, first and foremost, for those who were not here in the last show, Happy New Year. All my best wishes, health, happiness, and success. I'm going to be speaking notably about the Ottawa's Anti-Racism Secretariat report. There will be a link when we will get to that section. And in addressing it, I will be addressing, basically what happens too often when Black issues become diluted, minimized in light of greater goals. So, yeah.
I was going to say something very quickly, and then I started zoning in on the picture behind you, Cesar, and I forgot what I was going to say completely. I was going to ask.
It's a little bit captivating, and I have other paintings, but I really love this one. I have other paintings. The one in the Office of Roots and Culture Canada with notably Bob Marley. One in my Office of Child Welfare, which shows an image that white supremacy doesn't like to show about Indigenous people, aka an Indigenous family spending family time in the culture, showing love, showing warmth, the type of pictures that we haven't been used to seeing, right? However, as I say that, I remember I was once in a meeting of Black leaders, Black equity leaders, and I reminded them that even I deplored the fact that I don't have any of these paintings that show great Black female leaders. I'm sure it exists. I've seen it on Google, but as a painting. So the images exist, yes, but I've never seen a painting of great Black female leaders. And
I have a bunch of you're not seeing them. My computer isn't turned, but Comey Olaf, he does a lot of
Yes.
things, and so I'm looking across my room. I can see I have a number of his pictures of Black women. I have Harriet Tubman. I have Ella.
together, put together.
Yes.
Yeah,
Okay,
Comey,
well,
Yeah.
there you go. There you
And
go.
and
Yeah.
by the way, Comey Olaf is originally from Ottawa. He's moved to Toronto, and
Okay.
he's married to Bob Marley's granddaughter.
I
Oh
didn't know they
wow.
were married. I knew they were
Yes.
together.
It
Last time
just
I saw them,
no, they are married. They are
Okay.
actually married. But
Yeah.
I just saw Nelson Mandela behind you, Cesar, and
Yeah.
it reminded me that we have lost Desmond Tutu, Archbishop Desmond Tutu. While I was in Kenya, I got to watch the
Funeral.
memorial service in
Mhm.
Cape Town. So,
Mm.
but what were you going to say, Elle?
I can't remember. It totally slipped my mind. So why don't we maybe jump into? Well, we're just hosting until Dr. Vibe gets back. Why don't we jump into Lincoln Alexander Day and MLK Day? Why don't we start?
Yes.
Right. So, as most people will know from a lot of the coverage on U.S. media, specifically, the third Monday of January every year is observed as Martin Luther King Jr. Day. He was born on January 15th, 1929. And MLK Day was really a result of a lot of lobbying after his assassination in 1968. And it was President Ronald Reagan, a Republican, who signed the holiday into law in 1983. And it was first observed 3 years after that. So it's really ironic to me that after a Republican president signed that into law, after another Republican president, George Bush Jr., got the Voting Rights Act approved or reapproved or whatever you call that. Now it's Republicans that are blocking the passage of the John Lewis Act and the Voter Protection Act. That irony is not lost on me this year. So on a weekend when people are supposed to be in Washington, D.C. and, commemorating and celebrating and all of that, there's a whole bunch of people who headed to Arizona to pressure one of the Democratic senators who is, again, the irony of it all, who is actually getting in the way of the Senate passing this voter protection legislation. Kirsten Sinema, the senator from Arizona. The other
Yep.
senator is Joe Manchin from Virginia, right?
Yep.
Yes. So, yeah, it's a very tense, acrimonious, and scary, very scary time because I watched a lot of coverage today about the aspects of the voter suppression that are not the one aspect that is not being talked about enough. And that is after blocking access to the ballot, but people nullifying the results. So basically canceling your vote, even when you've jumped through all the hoops to go and vote, right? So the election boards and, the way the votes are counted and the electors and all of that. So, yeah.
Okay. So sorry for the technical challenges on my end, folks. Internet challenges, but I am back hopefully for the whole conversation. Want to get on maybe Sarah start off, but either one of you, Elle or Cesar, how do you feel on MLK? His birthday was yesterday. It's a weekend in the States. We also have Lincoln Alexander Day coming up in a few days in Canada. How do you feel, and how do you feel about the state of race in Canada?
Go ahead, Sister.
Oh, go ahead. I was saying before that I actually, until Sarah's email, I actually didn't know we had Lincoln Alexander Day. I mean, so that shows you how effective the media on that has been in terms of letting people know that. I think first of all, to go to MLK Day, what's interesting, obviously, with MLK over the years is how much MLK's true politics have been watered down and how much he has been appropriated into, put into whatever box people feel he fits. So then we get things like, MLK wanted to hold hands with white kids, and you're out here saying you want to defund the police. It's like MLK was extremely radical. Let's not forget when he was shot. He was shot when he was organizing sanitation workers in Memphis, who were largely Black, but he was recognizing class and race increasingly, right? So he was saying that they fought for civil rights, but they hadn't thought about the economic issues as much. If you ever read Beyond Vietnam, he, of course, has all kinds of commentary on American imperialism and war and militarism, and thinks about what it means to be a Black American within that. He was radicalizing in his politics. He wasn't getting softer as he got older. He was actually getting far more radical. And that's exactly at the point where he's shot. He was talking about, if you read the final speech, everyone knows I've been to the mountaintop, but he's also talking about how Black people have economic power and we can boycott whiskey, Pepsi, and Wonder Bread, right? And he spends a significant portion of that speech talking about the economic power of the Black community and like what it would mean to withhold our money. And, nobody talks about these things. So on MLK Day, I really encourage people to get rid of the cartoon character that's being given to us to serve. Everyone resisted MLK when he was alive. And then after they shot him, they've tried to mold him into a non-threatening figure and then use him against radical Black people. Like, if only you could be more like MLK. But, you don't actually tell us what MLK stood for. For many years, as a young Black person, like many young Black people, I liked X, and I also thought MLK was dry and soft, right? You're like, oh, stop shoving MLK down my throat. Like, I like Malcolm X, And then, of course, when you actually get a chance to read MLK's work for yourself, you're like, oh my goodness, like he was talking about policing, he was talking about prisons, he was talking about war. So it's actually really important that we don't accept an image that's being manufactured for us and we go back to the man's work. Which, as I said, is extremely timely, extremely radical. He was talking about the same issues we're talking about today. When you say like what's going on in Black Canada, you can go back into speech, what he's writing from prison, what he's writing, talking about white liberals that, is so instructive today. There's so much in there that remains fresh and remains on the radical edge of what we're still talking about. So, we are fighting those issues today. We're dealing with like it's very frightening what's happening in justice. For example, we're being sold an idea that we're having justice reform, and we are getting, mandatory minimums on drugs, right? They're removing that. And we have, some prosecutorial discretion and stuff being put in for that. But we also have a huge crackdown on guns, drugs, and gangs, which is coded as Black. So we have a message being sent to us in Canada right now that if you're a white child who, does some drugs, don't worry, we'll divert you from the court system. But if you're a Black kid involved in the streets in any kind of way, we're going to get you double. So we have a huge ramping up of policing. We've seen this crackdown through the pandemic, and it's only signaled the kinds of crackdown on social protests that we've been seeing. We've seen Indigenous people arrested across Canada. We saw the youth in Hamilton. We've seen, people in Halifax are arrested when they were dismantling the encampments. You've seen that across the country. Across the country, we've seen, I think, an unprecedented amount of people involved in protests that have been arrested and criminalized in the last few months, including potentially, for example, Suhail Ben-Salman, a great comrade of many of us in Ottawa, who was on New Year's Eve, was taken into custody at CBSA, and they call, oh, you don't know this. Yeah. So very briefly, on New Year's Eve, Suhail was called for an immigration check-in. A friend drove them to the appointment. It was very clear in the appointment that CBSA was delaying, and just putting up, just sign this, do this, and then just delaying. OPS showed up. They blocked in the friend who had driven them and arrested her and searched her car. They threatened both of them with charges of conspiracy to commit bodily harm using a weapon, which is an extremely serious charge. They took them to the police station, put them in the cells, and at about around midnight, they finally let them go. Suhail returned home to find that their apartment had been searched and tossed. And the only thing they imagine is that some of their political activity, particularly around prisons and COVID, put them on the radar of CBSA, who then collaborated with the police, like CBSA and OPS worked together to basically manufacture these charges and search and survey them. So that's an example of the kind of police state we have ongoing in Canada for peaceful activists who are actually just trying to, help people in jail, help people who are being deported. Suhail does so much work on things like sanctuary cities. And so I won't keep talking, and I'm talking a long time, but these don't be fooled, right? That people really think that in 2022, we have this justice bill. They're introducing, they're going to consult on anti-Black racism in the justice system. We have the sentencing project. We have these things, and we do have these things, but we're seeing a really frightening crackdown across the board in our prisons, in our policing. And if you are Black and you can be accused of being in a gang, none of these things are going to be for you. I talk to many Black men that are in prison right now and not in gangs, but they're being labeled as being in gangs. They're having, like somebody actually went in, they were asked, why don't you have a tattoo? Like, what's your tattoos? And the guy's like, I don't have any tattoos. Like, Black guy. And they're like, whoa, where's your tattoos? Like, why don't you have one? Because they're literally making the pre-assumption that you're like a member of a gang. So I'll stop there. But my main point was we are headed into some dark places, and MLK was a radical, and we should know that. So those are my two main points.
Okay. Cesar?
Well, Sister L spoke very well. And thank you so much, Sister Sarah, for bringing up also Lincoln Alexander, because we know so well how, Canada comes off too often, as we see in the case of, Rosa Parks and how many people know Viola Desmond. Canada comes off too often as America's, kind of like colonial state, if not little brother. We celebrate Americans, rightfully, we should, absolutely. Rosa Parks and Martin Luther King are part of our family, but we tend to forget too often those on this very land who basically would have had our own passport, who basically bled and sacrificed. So to basically just add to what has been said, all the many great points, what I will say is very much this. Brother Martin Luther King Jr., as you see here behind me, it's kind of weird to say, but you see behind me on this great painting, when you look at Malcolm X and you look at Martin Luther King, we got to think that we live in a society where Betty White was born before them and lived so much longer. It's kind of a reminder of the plight that comes for standing up for Black issues. When I turned 40, recently turned 40, for me it was very exceptional because so many of my heroes didn't make it to 40. MLK, Malcolm X, Sankara, Lumumba, etc., etc. They didn't make it to 40. But as rightfully said, it's great to have Martin Luther King Day, and we definitely should. But it's also very truthful to say that to my understanding, to my reading, to my studies of Brother Martin Luther King Jr., he's been whitewashed. He's been made a palatable to white audiences when we know that towards the end of his life, the FBI was speaking of him as some radicalized socialist, thinking of him as bringing down America. At the same time, there is some truth to that, but what's wrong with being radical? I am a radical. We are all radical. We are all fundamentally radical against racism, radical against hurting Black people. I'm radical against hurting any aspects of Black lives, whether it be Black children, Black women, Black LGBTQ, Blacks on the other side of the planet and even the other side of the universe. I am radical about such things. And MLK was radical. His radicalism basically led him to go from 1955, the bus boycott, to 1963, which was a walk against the Walk on Washington, against poverty, and against racism, because that's what it was about. Those were the two topics, racism and poverty, as are so often linked together, and we see it so well during this pandemic in terms of, Blacks being disproportionately impacted by COVID. But at the same time, the MLK that I like to remind people about is not the whitewash version of I have a dream. The dream is legitimate. The Martin Luther King I like to remind people about is the Martin Luther King of Black is Beautiful. That speech that he made in terms of reaffirming the beauty of Blackness, but also recognizing how what is associated with Blackness, from the color to the people, is too often painted as negative in order to keep oppressing people. And if you want a perfect example on a very concrete example. It's when he answered that interviewer, white interviewer. I can't remember the name of the interviewer, but about hanging by the bootstraps. When he basically talked and reminded that you cannot compare the reality of blacks coming out of segregation on a piece of paper when for the last 300 to 400 years they had been held in bondage, when the systemic issues and discriminations are still so very much present that even right here in Canada, we need to do a show such as Black in Canada. This is also why we celebrate Lincoln Alexander. You know, one of those black people who was the first in so many categories in the 80s and 90s. So this is 20, 30 years after the death of Brother Martin Luther King. You see, so that's the importance in terms of Brother Martin Luther King, Brother Malcolm X, Sister Rosa Parks, Lumumba, etc., etc. You know, those that we see today in black and white videos, they paved the way for us and for some of us to be celebrated, such as Lincoln Alexander. But here in Canada, we have to know about Lincoln Alexander just as of Viola Desmond, 100%.
So what I should have done was, sort of given a bit of background as to who the late Honorable Lincoln Alexander was. He was born in Toronto in 1922. So, I mean, he's Canadian. It's not like he was born in the West Indies, but of West Indian parents. And Lincoln Alexander sort of represents different aspects of the Black experience in Canada, right? Including World War II, military. He was a veteran, right? Mm-hmm. So when he wore that lieutenant governor uniform, it wasn't to be cute. It was because he actually had, served in the Canadian forces. One. Two, he had actually been a sleeping car porter at some point because in terms of labor relations, Black people who were aspiring to a middle-class life or lifestyle, that was their entry point, a sleeping car porter, most of them called George. And then, of course, the political sphere as well, with being the first Black member of Parliament in the House of Commons. That was in the late 60s, actually, César. And then he became the first Black federal minister under Joe Clark, right? And then after that, no matter what you think about it, he was the first Black person to be in a vice-regal role. He was the first Black lieutenant governor anywhere in Canada. After him followed people like Mayanne Francis in Nova Scotia, and then we had the Governor General, Michael Jean, etc., etc. But there's also the Lincoln Alexander, who was the racial equity, racial justice champion, especially with regard to youth, young people. And that is really the legacy that he was most proud of, and the legacy that is celebrated on Lincoln Alexander Day, which is mostly observed in Ontario, mostly around Hamilton, the greater Toronto area, et cetera, with Lincoln Alexander scholarships, awards, et cetera. But again, I wonder if it has to do with, the Canadian propensity for always admiring what's on the other side of the border or overseas, as opposed to our own. A lot of our artists have had to go to the US or the UK or somewhere else in order to be appreciated back home, right? So really, we do ourselves, and especially Black people, we need to start in the Black community. We need to make a big deal out of it. We make a big deal out of MLK at all our churches, etc. The city of Ottawa, we have a ceremony tomorrow, which is online, which we've had for almost 20 years now. a lot of cities across Canada have that. Where's the one for Lincoln Alexander across the country? So that our Canadian kids can have a Canadian civil rights champion that they can look up to.
All right, I'm going to move it along because time is fleeting
Yes.
fast. So next up, there is a report just out about defunding the police report. I'm going to let Elle take lead on this one.
I'll be very, very quick on this. I just wanted to let people know about this because as we know, as we see regionally, we don't always get the same information. So I was commissioned, it was free, so I don't know if the word commission is the right thing, to write a report on defunding the police in Halifax by the Board of Police Commissioners. And we did a very extensive public engagement survey. I think we had the most surveys in any report on people around policing. We had almost 2,500 responses on that.
Wow.
We also did engagement with the National Police Federation. We spoke to them during it to understand like their perspective. They represent the RCMP officers. We did consultation with like community service organizations, and we have produced, it's a 217-page report. It is long, but we are covering 4 pillars of defunding. So everything from accountability, transparency, and police internal issues, detasking the police and retasking community, legislative regulatory reform, and then financial reform, particularly looking at things like participatory budgeting in municipalities so that people have a say over where their money goes. So organized under those 4 pillars, we address everything from sexual assault reporting. You can remove the police from that, and more people are willing to report. Traffic stops and traffic calming measures that can be done without police. Mental health models that remove policing from that response, which is across the board, even among people who do not support defunding, including the police. Everybody more or less agrees that the police have no role in responding to mental health. They are not trained. They are not appropriate. So looking at those models, we examine the Police Act and how it could be reviewed. Like it's very, very extensive. We came up with 36 recommendations. So I'm just encouraging people to take a look at it. It's called Defunding the Police, Defining a Way Forward for HRM. There's a lot in there that other community groups may find helpful in terms of applying this in their own municipalities. And as people continue to press their own city councils and police boards around these issues, it's a very, very practical document. We wanted to provide a pathway. So, we all say things like, why don't we take money from the police and put it into housing? We're trying to actually provide some of the mechanisms through which this could take place and shift that conversation on defunding so that people stop seeing it as this frightening negative thing that, introduces crime and danger in society, and actually think about it as how we can think about public safety and well-being differently, and as we build a community of care instead of one of punishment. So that's it. I just wanted to let people know about that. It's maybe one of the few report processes that have been led by a Black woman. I am proud of that. So I do hope that people do take this work into account, read it, critique it, introduce it in your own municipalities, draw upon it. Much of it is, I think, very relevant. And we really did try to do practical recommendations. So there you go. So that's it.
Wonderful. Anyone want to add? And if our producer can actually put the link on the screen for that, that would be helpful, And what I will do is on the replay, I'll also put the link for it in the comments section. But go ahead, Sarah, go ahead.
I have a question for Elle. To what extent does media, the mainstream media specifically, undermine the kind of work that you just did?
Oh, 100%. I mean, even before people, it's a long report. It's a 217-page report. And you have people commenting about the report within 5 minutes. So I'm like, I know you haven't read it. So, it's a long report. So right from the very beginning, especially being a Black woman engaged in this work, you're automatically somebody said, I was surprised there was so many facts in this report. I'm like, do you forget that I'm a
what?
academic?
They actually
what?
said that.
Yeah, because they just picture you as this person who rants,
wow.
who hates the police, and who is angry, and they can't wrap their minds around the fact that all of this all along has been sourced, and that we've always been based in studying these issues. That when we say we don't want body cameras, we're not off, we're following studies that have been done for 10 years, right? So people show up brand new, think you don't know what you're talking about, and then make an assumption that because you're a Black person, you're just ranting or just saying things. Except, of course, everything we're saying, we were sourcing across studies, we were looking at academic work, we were scanning other municipalities and looking at programs. Like it's based in research. So that's how people see it. And then, of course, so, you make these recommendations. So obviously we talked about the policing of unhoused people and that the city should place more money into affordable housing. That's like, what does that have to do with policing? But then you have other people complaining you didn't include this. So you can't win for trying. One reason why I did the report for free was I didn't want to be beholden to the city and the municipality. I certainly didn't want to have to do work on their terms, but it was an incredible amount of work to do for free. And then in return, what you get back is, people that refuse to read your work, make assumptions about you, make assumptions about the topic. And then, you receive a huge amount of blowback. So it is difficult emotionally. And obviously it's not, I'm saying this here, but it's, I'm not going to publicly comment on that. Like, it is for people to engage with, but it's very hard. It's very, very hard to be a Black woman and wake up and do this kind of work day after day and mostly receive threats for it, or people just dismissing you, people calling you names, and then refusing to actually read the work you did, which is, in fact, if people read it, I think they would find that it's very practical work. It's talking about things like the complaints process and how to streamline that, how to review police training, just really, really basic things. So it is definitely difficult because you're dealing with those perceptions. And that's been my whole life where, I've been right about these issues all along, and people have consistently called me crazy and all of those things, which happened to MLK, which happens to everybody, right? It's not new. I'm not comparing myself to MLK. I'm just saying that we know that when Black people speak and bring forth ideas, the response is always to dismiss us. So, and you get at the same time, so it's going to be just ranting, and then it's academic and elitist and too long. You're like, well, which do you want? Like, do you want it to be sourced, or did you want me to rant? So you really can't win. But we're not doing this work to win. I'm doing it to get the police board to perhaps make some act on the recommendations. And the reason why I'm sharing it here is because I'm hoping that Black people in particular can draw upon this report as people move forward in their own municipalities and fight these battles. So, we did this work for us. I'm not the only writer, particularly Taria Jadi, Harry Critchley, Julia Rogers, Jen Taylor. We were the main team. There was also a bigger subcommittee. You can find all those names on the second page of the report. But yeah, it can feel discouraging, definitely. But you have to remember, I didn't do this work for public roses. I did this work because it's an important issue. And I really do think it's important that Black women's voices be officially recognized, because so often we're in the background. And then when it's time to have the speaker or the report, it's either a white person or it's a Black man, but it's so very rarely a Black woman who's given a central role in this official way. And I took that seriously. I think, I wanted to represent for that too.
Great question, Sarah.
Sorry.
Cesar, no problem. So, Cesar, anything you want to add before we move on to our next conversation topic?
I want to congratulate our sister Elle, because to participate with others in the writing of such a report, she said it so well. The denigration is there, the disbelief, despite the fact that facts and perspectives that have been brought up in her community, in other Black communities. This is a global issue. Let's pretend like protests were not worldwide following George Floyd, but protests were there even before George Floyd, and we have been protesting still after George Floyd. At the same time, as one who has sat on police and community committees, just as one who has trained police officers on equity issues, it's very, very important to bring this up and to support our Black and Indigenous leaders, advocates, teachers, people who are daring to address institutions of power and discrimination, such as too often police is, because those institutions, it's not to say that John, Peter, Paul, Becky, Karen, or even Kofi, because they wear a uniform of police, that they can kill you. It's the institution that kills, and too often that very same institution that creates a culture of violence upon those of marginalized communities, and that culture of violence too often comes with impunity to the law, impunity in terms of other institutions that need to be addressed. So, absolutely, I am a supporter of defunding the police. The last group of police officers, police senior leadership that I trained end of last year, I definitely gave them these perspectives. And now, thanks to Elle's report, and please send me the report. I'd love to consult it. It's very important because, these are tools that we can use, all of us, as we keep dealing with police. Thank you so much, Sister Elle. And congrats to your entire team.
All right, fantastic. We're moving fast and furious because we don't got a little amount of time here. So Cesar brought a story to the attention. We want to hear more about it. Ottawa's Anti-Racism Secretariat. Give us some background and tell us what it's all about.
Very shortly, and if Luke will be able to put, our producer will be able to put the links. Long story short, yesterday there was a meeting, January 15th, regarding the third consultation of the Ottawa's Anti-Racism Secretariat report. What we heard, basically, in English et en français. How can I put it? Great initiative, but I find it to be a misstep from the start. A very important misstep from the start that must be addressed, which is called the dilution of Black identities and Black concerns. We are having yet another report where absolutely it does talk about racism, how to tackle racism in terms of different categories from socioeconomic development to youth, but also housing, healthcare, etc., etc. Absolutely, there's a lot of good in that report, yes. But I took offense along other community leaders, Black community leaders, to the fact that this report is born from an initiative out of the Black community, brought forward by Black community leaders here in Ottawa. And yet we have a report that does not have a specific section to tackle anti-Black racism. I refuse to live and to be silent when you put racism that Black people face in the same chapter and conversation as anti-Asian hate, as anti-Semitism, as Islamophobia. It is absolutely false. It's a lie. Good for the report to have had a separate section to address Indigenous issues. Absolutely, that's good. But when you keep diluting anti-Black racism to put it in that section, aka racialized people, aka BIPOC people, aka marginalized people, it becomes a lie because even the United Nations recognize that on the four corners of the world, there are two groups of people who face particular victimization: Indigenous people and Black people. Black people are victims of racism in all other categories that they are put in. You talk about Islamophobia, guess what? Black Muslims are victims of racism by lighter skin, Arab and white Muslims. You want to talk about anti-Asian hate? What happened last year in 2020? While there was anti-Asian here, Black people in China were victims of racism. They were being called microbes and viruses. It is so bad that the United States, the how do you call that? I think the Foreign Service or the State Department sent emails to Black Americans in China and Asia for them to be careful of the safety. You want to talk about anti-Semitism? Show me all that Jewish support that Anami Paul got. You see what I mean? Black people are victims of racism in Israel. They're victims of racism in Jewish communities right here in New York, in North America. You want to talk about, Mexican, Hispanics, Latinos? Do we need to talk about how Afro-Latinos and Afro-Brazilians are terribly victims of racism? Especially because Latinos are white people who will speak Spanish. But the white people. The white people. Spaniards are not going to claim to not be white people. Vicente Fox, the former president of Mexico. He's a white man. So, no, this is what I denounce, along others, because I find it very insulting And I'm not here to cry victim or, oh my God, poor us black people. Once again, we are the victims. They did not respect us. No, 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 no. This is a matter of intellectual honesty and a matter of dignity. It doesn't, it's not a spitting to those who have done the report. They did a great job in terms of the content of what they have heard. But they have had a serious misstep from the very start. Why? As I was speaking with the journalists, I reminded people of something. Show me that black person will think they can go to that Jewish event and dismiss addressing the Holocaust or anti-Semitism because he wants to talk about slavery, colonization, and anti-black racism. Show me that black person was going to go to that event about Islamophobia that concerns uh, uh, Arabs from the Middle East, Maghrebis from North Africa, and even black Muslim, and he's going to stand up to talk about slavery, colonization, and anti-black racism. Show me that black person was going to go to that event about anti-Asian hate, and he's going to diminish what happens to Chinese, Koreans, and Japanese because of anti-black. That doesn't exist.
Mhm.
So I will not be there to accept that the concerns of my people, no matter how we can disagree, no matter how we can, basically see art to art for ideological reasons, such as on religion, or basically on politics, or whether, police brutality, whatever it is. At the end of the day, we live in a world where on the four corners of the world, black people are victim of racism. And guess what? Even in Africa and the Caribbean, black people are victim of racism because when you have whites, Asians, Arabs there, black people become victim of racism.
Okay, Sarah, go ahead.
Yeah, and just so everyone knows, the Anti-Racism Secretariat is led by a black man.
Consider
That's
also
Ottawa's first ever black counselor. Can you imagine? Like it took 100 and God knows how many years for Ottawa to get one black counselor. But Cesar, this diluting of the anti-black racism reality within, sort of the larger pot of, you know, racism generally or whatever, it's done on purpose. C'est vraiment voulu. It's a way to completely disempower us and completely delegitimize our warranted concerns in terms of how we are viewed, stereotyped, mistreated, maligned, etc., etc. I mean, this secretariat, this is not going to be like the first attempt at such an initiative. Look at the federal public service over how many decades. I remember back in the day when they had. Well, first of all, you couldn't even talk about anti-black racism. Okay, that's not even something you mentioned back then. And once they managed to set up something that was going to address racism within the federal public service, very quickly, the black element got diluted very, very quickly. It's systematic. It happens all the time.
Mm-hmm.
And the thing is how to keep sort of throwing that back in the face of the people that are trying to do the diluting. And I like the examples you used in terms of, look, as a black person, I'm not coming into your Jewish event that deals with anti-Semitism and to talk about the effects of the Middle Passage. Okay, I'm not going to do that. So don't come to our event about anti-black racism and start telling us about how, oh yeah, you understand, etc., etc. No. Respect our experience as you expect us to respect your experience. So I wish more of us would speak in those terms when we are in those fora. And I'm sure there were not people speaking like that in the meeting that you attended yesterday, unfortunately.
And you will notice that somehow, some way, the dismissal of a specific section on anti-black racism, aka the community, the black community, that from whom the initiative began, such as the CEC, Compact, Abdirahman Abdi, Vincent Gardner, etc., etc., blacks who have been victims of police brutality, leading to creation of initiatives to tackle racism, but then the black issues get diluted. And yet at the same time, we live in a world where, you know, we have all these communities, and yet, like I gave an example, Anami Paul, they kept mentioning, black and Jewish. I didn't see the Jewish side of a community stand up for her. We talk about Islamophobia, or we should talk more in terms of anti-Muslim bigotry. It's important to talk about it. What happened in London is a tragedy. But please show me all those North African and Middle Eastern capitals that protested when George Floyd got killed. It was only in Tunisia. We talk about anti-Asian hate. My God, do we want to talk about racism against black people in India? In China? Naomi Osaka, even herself being half Japanese, being the tennis champion. Do we want to talk about racism in the Latino community? Amara La Negra did not become famous just because of her looks and curves. It's also because she speaks out against racism in the Latino community, who play victim in terms of white Anglo-Saxons. But at the end of the day, take all those white Latinos, drop them to Africa. You think anybody's going to look at them differently than the French and white person who are there? So no, I will not be silent to such thing, because I find it absolutely revolting, absolutely insulting. As a man, I cannot go to an event addressing the victimization of women, and we know when it says women, they're talking about white women. If you don't say indigenous women or black women or LGBTQ women, we know the conversation is about white, heterosexual, middle-class, educated women. As a man, to be a black man, I know I cannot go in there and start to dismiss the issues and to say, yeah, but there's also men who get killed every year by women. Yeah, but we have to show respect to the communities, especially the communities that begin the work, that are fundamental to the nature of the work.
All right, I got to cut
it.
It
just kills the project.
Got to cut it. Elle, anything you want to add to this commentary?
No, I mean, as usual, everything's come off our backs, the civil rights model. And even before that, the first global campaign was, of course, the abolition campaign. That was the first global rights campaign. And all the things we do today, like petitions, that all came out of that movement. That is stuff. And people always want to credit that to white abolitionists, but it was African people escaping people like, oh my gosh, what am I forgetting his name? Olaudah Equiano, writing books about this, slave narratives, people speaking, the over 6,000 narratives of testimony left by African people like Harriet Tubman. The fact that, people were something like up to a sixth or more of enslaved people in Virginia were escaping prior to the Civil War, forcing the crisis in states' rights that people say the war was actually over. It was about African people going to other states and thus forcing a conflict. So all the models that we use today go back to our struggle against enslavement, and then we re-perfected those things in our struggle during civil rights. And as we know, the biggest beneficiaries of civil rights have been white women. The biggest beneficiaries of affirmative action have been white women, not Black people, and certainly not Black women. So people continue to use our strategies and our tactics, and everybody walks over our backs through the doors we open and then closes it in our face. So
the biggest benefactors of the NAACP creation, aka NAACP created by Blacks and Jews, but the biggest benefactors have been Jewish people. Affirmative action, white women, etc., etc., etc.
All right. We're about ready to wrap up. Cesar, you have one last thing you want to do a quick comment on the Mali Guinea with African West? Quickly.
Yes, absolutely. Very, very, very short. So for those who do not know, there has been terrorism attacks and killings in the region of Africa called Sahel. So Sahel is technically that part of this Africa right underneath the the northern African countries, aka Maghrebi countries, and where you have that layer, that band of black nations called the Sahel. This has come after three countries, the usual three countries, aka USA, United Kingdom, and France, have brought down Mohammed Gaddafi, and from there, arms spreading and terrorism spreading. Long story short, France has been involved in Mali for, I'm going to say, well, in 2022, so I think 8 years now, and they announced that they're going to leave fighting and, to leave the, basically balkanize the situation, aka Africanize the conflict. Because since France has been there, instead of lesser terrorism, there's been more terrorism. And it has actually been proven that on more than one occasion, the terrorists were using weapons of the French army. Long story short, people got fed up and there was basically a coup. So a military junta that came to power by taking down the former president, aka French-approved president Ibrahim Boubacar Keïta. Now, the military junta that's there announced that they are not going to change the government and hold democratic elections as the West and the United Nations were expecting. Let me be very clear. Supporting democracy is not supporting democracy as per the West. We need to have African solutions, Black solutions to our African and Black issues. So the ECOWAS, aka
30 seconds.
CEDEAO, has decided to impose sanctions on Mali and the country of Guinea by its leader, Doumbouya. Colonel Doumbouya is the only African nation that stood up for Mali in saying that they refuse to impose sanctions. So a big shout out to Guinea and the leader, Doumbouya, for refusing to apply sanctions on another African country that wants true independence.
By the way, Ibrahim Boubacar Keïta died today.
Oh, there you go.
He passed away.
Oh,
The deposed former president of Mali.
All right. Well, we have to come to a hard stop, so we've got to get going, folks. So, as always, we want to thank all our panelists on our bi-weekly roundtables, and we'll have them, if they are up to it, give their contact information. First up, L. Jones.
As usual, I don't have much social media. You can email me el.jones@msvu.ca.
Sarah.
Before I give out my contact info, shout out to all my Kenyans out there and wishing them a lot of courage and luck as we go through this ridiculously long election campaign, which was already underway. The election is on August 9th, but the campaign was already underway when I got to Kenya at the beginning of December. And just keep in mind that this is happening right in the middle of the Omicron variant wave, which is wreaking, not wreaking as much havoc as it is over here in North America. But my thoughts go out to them. I can be reached at blackonblack891@hotmail.com. And our show, Black on Black, airs every Saturday from 11 a.m. to noon Eastern Time on CHUO 89.1 FM.
Thank you. Cesar.
Thank you so much for the show, Dr. Vibe, Sister L, Sister Sarah. I can be reached rootsandculturecanada.com and on Facebook, Cesar Remy, Rimy. Always there. And a shout out to my country of birth, aka my colonial enclave of Cameroon, hosting the African Cup of Nations. Whatever the result, I just hope people are safe and I hope people are healthy so that we don't have some Cameroonian variant, if I can call it that.
Allez les lions! Allez les lions! Not les lions de la Teranga, les lions indomptables du Cameroun.
Thank you.
All right, it's Dr. Vibe here, host and producer of the award-winning Dr. Vibe show, the home of Epic Conversations on the host of Epic Conversations. And if you want to catch me, best place, just go to the website, thedrvibeshow.com. And as always, live your life as a dream. If you can dream it, you can make it. Sometimes you have to get smaller to get stronger. Block assumptions and aim bigger, aim better, aim higher, aim wider. Love, faith, and respect. And remember to give yourselves grace and keep it going. God bless. Peace to all. Keep the faith. We'll see you soon. Take care, everybody. Thanks for watching. What is up, everybody? It's Dr. Vibe here. And as always, on most Sunday afternoons at 5 p.m. Eastern Time, Black Canada Talking is a live online event that provides Black Canadians the opportunity to give their takes and POVs on stories that are of importance to them.
Guinea was could not afford to participate, but at the last minute came in because there's always issues of money and corruption.
That guy gets to go to jail because he doesn't have the money and he doesn't have the status that Bill Cosby gets. And Bill Cosby gets to get off, not just for the money as well, advancing age, etc.
I'm just going to echo a few things you're mentioning. We know that the Olympics, the Tokyo committee and also the Olympic Committee was against any protests.
God bless, peace well, keep the faith, and remember, walk good.